more accurate, and let's talk about them. Let's look at them. Here's ancient manuscripts. I picked some of the best because in general, most documents in antiquity we have one copy. Okay? So, if we look at, for example, the number of copies of Catullus and Pliny the Younger and Plato, these are really good ones. Herodotus, Euripides, Caesar's Gallic Wars, Aristotle's documents, that's all of them. Josephus, that's, let's see. Josephus, that's Josephus's wars, I think. I should have been more clear, but Josephus' wars, Sophocles, these are just general specifics of the best of their documents in general. So, of the Acts, I have 531 Greek copies. Of the New Testament entire, that is all the manuscripts of the New Testament documents, I have 24,000. The next best is old Sophocles. And actually, these are historical works. The old Sophocles, I got 193, which is not very good compared to 500 or 24,000, but that's okay, right? Here's the number of copies. This is on a little graph there. And I put in here, I added in Homer's Iliad. Now the reason I put in Homer's Iliad is because it's kind of a benchmark in a lot of ancient historical documents. We know, we're almost absolutely certain we have all the text from Homer's Iliad. How certain do you think we are that we have all the text of the Acts? Very darn certain. Okay? And by the way, the Iliad is not history. The Acts says it is history, right? Okay? The Iliad, is that a primary, secondary, or tertiary source? It's big time tertiary, right? It's written by, basically, Homer wrote it down, but he was writing about something that happened 500 years prior to that in the Trojan War. I don't think he was alive in the Trojan War, okay? Even as a little baby. So, in any case, the guy who wrote Acts, Luke, 531 copies, historical source. Let's see. The Iliad is next best to the New Testament in general, and almost certainly have all the complete text of the Iliad as written by Homer. We're 38 times 2 magnitudes more certain of the complete text of the New Testament documents. That's in general. But of Acts, we're exactly sure. Now, if you notice, did I have them on here? I have them on here. Josephus' wars, the same period as the Acts, approximately. So in Josephus' documents, I am 10 times more certain than Josephus that I have the complete text of Acts. So just based on this test, if you were going to teach about the first century, would you pick Josephus or Acts? But why do we always teach Josephus and not Acts? We're 60 times more certain than we are of Herodotus, and that's where we get most of our information about the ancient world, especially in general. So in any case, the other one, other bibliographical tests, the less the time interval between when the original and the earliest existing manuscript, the more accurate the work's considered. So less time between the original and the earliest equals greater accuracy. That should be obvious, right? Because if I have a document that is, let's say, 50 years removed compared to a document that's 1,000 years removed, which is better? 50 years, right? So let's look at it. Here we go. Here is Catullus and Pliny. Pliny is probably the best we have. Pliny is really good. Josephus 850. The New Testament average is 80, but Acts is 40 to 90, depending on where you're pulling your, who you're listening to. There are early daters and late daters. So I'm going to give it 40 to 90. You can take 90 if you want. But in any case, look, here's a little graphic, okay? Lower is better, smaller is better. Oh, and here, let me see. Yeah, I got this out. Before I make a conclusion, I guess I'll show you all the data I have here. This is good stuff. The Chester dating, which is Papyrus 45, has the Acts in it. And that has been dated, the early date is 100 to 150 AD. Actually, some have dated earlier than that. But this is the earliest date for the Chester dating. Chester dating includes almost all of Acts. There is another dating, Chester dating at 200 AD. That's called the late date for Chester dating. But it has much, but not all, the New Testament on papyrus. It has all the Pauline letters and Acts, which is a really cool thing. I also should mention this. It is a papyri. It's a biblios, right? The next one we have is the Codex Vaticanus, which is like 325, and this is complete of the New Testament. Now, the reason I want to point this out is, what is a codex? A codex is a book. Why did we invent codexes or books?
It's more usable than something you have to roll and unroll.
Yeah, but why did we invent look, this is a 6th grade thing they should have taught us in 6th grade that they never did. Right? Didn't you ever ask yourself the question, why do we go from scrolls to books? Right? Well, it's convenient, right? It's the next computer technology.
Print a book.
To print what book?
The Bible.
The Bible. Actually, the New Testament documents. Because the earliest codexes that are extant are all New Testament documents. Why? Because they carried them around, right? They carried them from place to place. And they were much easier to use than a scroll. See? So the invention of books is directly related to Christianity. It's just, you know, the reason I point these things out to you is because in the modern era, we've gotten to this thing about, well, Christianity doesn't have any positive attributes, and Western culture seems to be on the decline, and what good is it, right? Well, Western culture brought you computers and books and, you know, courtly love. Don't you ladies like it much better that you're sitting next to your husbands or your friends and not sitting next to their shoulder warriors, right? You know, where you can't even get a word in edgewise. You know, that's kind of a weird thing to me and to us, right? But that whole culture, our culture, is based because of that. Yes, ma'am.
Who is Chester Beatty, or what is that?
Chester Beatty is a guy who owned the papyri originally, and so
When originally?
He's an Englishman who collected papyri, who collected ancient documents, and a lot of these documents are all named after either where they were found, or a person who owned them, or, you know, whatever. You know, many times schools, like there's one in Minnesota, I think, that is named after a school. But, you know, as we date them, and by the way, there's a whole bunch of these manuscripts all over the place we haven't fully dated or studied. They're all over. And so someday, you know, as we pull them out of the archives and get to them, you know, and unravel them and open them, then maybe we'll find out more, because we know there are earlier pieces, parts. In the bibliographical test, Pliny the Younger's history, 800 years compared to 80 years for the New Testament documents. And in general, 800 compared to 150 for Acts. 150. You know, even if you take the late date, we're talking about 150 years. So based on the bibliographical test, you can be 100 times more certain of the New Testament documents as a collection, and 100 times more certain of Acts than you can of Josephus or any other document in antiquity. All historians know this. If a historian doesn't know this, they ain't a very good historian. Because this is basic stuff. Now can you answer my question? Why don't they teach us anymore? What has happened? In the age of reason, how can you have a document, well, like Plutarch, that talks about miracles, or Caesar, that talks about miracles, or Pliny, that talks about miracles, or Herodotus, that talks about miracles, or the New Testament that talks about miracles, or Josephus that talks about miracles? Wait a second. They use Josephus and Pliny and Caesar. Why don't they use the New Testament?
Not politically, socially.
It has become not politically correct. And therefore, by the way, it has become very politically incorrect to even teach this to kids and to adults anymore. Because immediately, what does it show and prove?
Christianity.
Well, not necessarily Christianity, but it gives you a proof text to the documents of the basis of Christianity. So, you see what I'm saying? So, the New Testament documents, if you were teaching a course in the 1st century, what documents would you have to use if you're a good historian? the New Testament documents. You'd have to. You see this? Because if you use Josephus, you're using a secondary source, using a source that's not as good. Remember I talked about merit and degree? So, but there are other tests we use. So there are other tests. What do I got here? Oh, this is just a composite of all that information I showed you, but this is applied to the documents of the New Testament. So you can kind of see them all at once. Luke is a primary source document in general, the author, approximate lifespan, the number of manuscripts, etc. This is just really neat information, just really information. The earliest extant manuscript, I've used the earliest extant we know, and then the fragments. We have fragments, which are really interesting, because if we do have fragment from 85 that we've put in 85. So did Paul borrow a quote from someplace else? Or is that fragment really a fragment of one of his letters? And it could be, because he wrote his letters around 50 to 60 AD, right? Pretty intriguing, isn't it? You know, very intriguing in my mind. In any case, if you see all these documents, the lapse rate, the number of documents, really incredible from a historical standpoint. So based on the bibliographical test, we could say that we are 10 times, 10 magnitudes more certain that we have the full text, and that the text is, well, the full text is good. We have good text. We know what the writing is, okay? Better than any other document in antiquity. But that doesn't really define veracity. That is the historicity of the original text. It only defines how well the work reflects the original. So we're very certain we have the copies, we know the words of the original. Okay? We're not certain yet, because we haven't applied the other two tests. We have to apply the internal and external test to establish the veracity of that is the historical validity of the texts. So, let's do it. Number one, you look in the internal test for a lack of internal contradictions. You look to see if it's comprehensive and cohesive. You look for the degree of witness, primary, secondary, tertiary. Is it geographically placed? Is it chronologically placed? What are the historical claims? Does it claim to be history or myth or fiction or opinion? What does it claim to be? So, let's look. Lack of internal contradiction, number one. Many works in antiquity have serious problems with this. I threw in some examples. I thought you would like to see some examples. The New Testament works display no evident internal contradictions. That is, internal within the document itself. Some people like to point out external contradictions, that is, between documents, but there are no known internal contradictions, okay, within the documents. The Acts displays itself no evident internal contradictions, but let's look at cohesiveness. Here's an example from the Zostran Pavladi text. There's Buddhas, the creation myth. There is the Bhamanyast, the prophetical revelation, and the laws. And this is an example from the Buddhas. In the name of the creator, Ahimsad, the Zand Akis, Zand knowing or tradition informed, which is first about Asmarad's original creation and the antagonism of the evil spirit, and afterwards about the nature of the creatures from the original creation till the end, which is the future existence, the Tamalpase, as we revealed by the religion of the Mazedanians. So it's declared that Asmarad is supreme in omniscience and goodness, and unrivaled in splendor. The region of light is the place of Amazad, which they call endless light, and the omniscience and goodness of the unrivaled Amazad is what they call revelation. If you can understand this, explain it to me. You think there are problems in Christianity about Genesis. And Genesis is a pretty clear document, okay? In the beginning, God created. I don't know who created, okay? But this is a creation myth of Buddhas, okay? How about another example? Here's Chronicles of Japan. This was completed in 720 AD. 720 AD, okay? Of old, heaven and earth were not yet separated, in the yin and yang not yet divided. They formed a chaotic mass like an egg, which was of obscurely defined limits and contained germs. The purer and cleaner part was thinly drawn out and formed heaven, while the heavier and grosser elements settled down and became earth. The finer element easily became a united body, but the consolidation of the heavy and the gross element was accomplished with difficulty. Heaven was therefore formed first, and earth was established subsequently. Thereafter, divine beings were produced between them. A little more clear, right? We moved up about 700 years. But can anybody explain this to me? I mean, this is getting pretty incoherent, right? It's not very cohesive, is it? Because what is it? It is a creation myth. Now, you know, I could give you all the creation myths. But guess what? In the beginning, God created. That's a pretty clear creation. Whether you want to say myth or document, or what do you want to call it? You know what I'm saying? See? So if you ever wondered why, and by the way, the Greeks really thought positively about the Hebraic documents of the Old Testament era. Because they were comprehensible and clear. And the Greeks liked that. Comprehensible and clear. In any case, when we apply the cohesive and comprehensibility test, many works in antiquity, especially religious works, they're neither comprehensive nor cohesive. The New Testament documents are both comprehensive and cohesive. In Acts, you know, have you read Acts? Yeah. In Greek, it's even more comprehensive and understandable. Okay, it's more comprehensive. It's cohesive. So, in English, it's not bad. It's pretty good. In fact, I'd say it's really good. But in the original Greek, it's really good. It's excellent. The degree of witness, primary, secondary, tertiary, graphically, chronologically. Acts 1, 1 through 3. We'll get to this in the next week in more detail, but it says, in my former book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus began to do and teach. And Luke says, many have undertaken to drop an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who through the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the world. Therefore, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also for me to write an orderly account. Luke, who wrote Acts, tells us that in Luke, the Gospel of Luke, that he is a what kind of a witness? Secondary witness. But he tells us that in Acts he is we know he is a eyewitness. So therefore, okay, you know, if you want to compare other works in antiquity, Josephus was an eyewitness to some of the things he saw. But we know that he generally was not a secondary witness. He was a tertiary witness to almost everything. See? He didn't take eyewitnesses. But what does Luke tell us he did? For Luke, the Gospel of Luke. He talked to the eyewitnesses. So this is a great secondary source. Matter of fact, this is very similar to what Theophilus and Herodotus wrote in the beginnings, the introductions, the prologues to their works. Except they weren't eyewitnesses or secondary witnesses. Luke makes it very clear. Degree of witness, and also this is just a comprehensive one again. I don't need it right now. So, we look at the degree of witness, we see that it's primary, and by the way, is it geographically placed? Was Luke there? Yeah, right. Is it chronologically placed? Was he there in time?
Yes.
Yeah. We don't need to really worry about this with primary witnesses, but when we talk about secondary and tertiary witnesses, it becomes more important. Because, right, if you're a secondary or tertiary witness and you have never been there, right? Or if you're not living in that time at all, then you have no clue, right? Or, well, it's used as history, okay? It's history documents, right? In any case, New Testament and Acts specifically are primary and secondary sources. They are geographically and chronologically placed. So compared to other works in antiquity, the New Testament Acts documents fulfill all the internal qualifications, at least as well if not better, than any other work in antiquity. Right? They pass the bibliographical test. The merit is very high, right? And the internal is very high. They don't contradict, they are comprehensive, etc. So let's, and based on, by the way, based on the bibliographical and the internal tests, a work is always historically given the benefit of the doubt. That is, if a work passes with good merit, the bibliographical and the internal tests, then you automatically give it a high standing of merit. So now what do you got to do to disprove it? You got to have something that has a higher merit, right? That's what the external tests are. So, I got more stuff. Let's go here. External tests. External tests compares other works, same region, same time in archaeology. So, archaeologists are always looking for stuff that they can, show, for example, from Pliny or from, Caesar or the Gallic Wars or whatever, right? They're looking for evidence in archaeological science. And likewise, we compare the works. We compare works from the same period, right? That's the point. But which one do you pick? One with high merit? Right. The ones with high merit win, right? We've already shown how many documents you're going to find with a higher degree of merit than the New Testament documents. None! We won. You already won. I've proven you, but I'm going to go further. I'm going to talk a little about this. We could compare the works of the New Testament to each other. Why? They're all high merit, right? But we don't have to do that, because we can compare them to others. And this is generally what I bring up to you. I'll show you some of these documents as we go through. We've got, the external authenticity is attested by Eusebius and Papias and Justin Martyr, Arius and Polycarp and Josephus, and many, many more. I can keep listing. Suetonius is listed. There's all kinds of information that is out there in the New Testament period, primary, secondary, tertiary, not so much primary. Primary documents are very hard to find in the ancient world. But they're not a high merit. But they're there. So, for example, I got Josephus. Now, a lot of people don't like this quote, but this is not a Josephus, okay? I think it's Wars. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man. For he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him. For he appeared to them alive again the third day. As the divine prophets had foretold, these and 10,000 other words, blah, blah, blah. It says, the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct to this day. Now, a lot of historians don't like that Josephus wrote. There's about 4 or 5 quotes in Josephus that are great attributes to Christian events in the New Testament documents. One about James, a couple about Christ. There's another one about John or somebody. In any case, these were added, right? Yeah, somebody just added them. There's no evidence they were added. They're in all the original manuscripts we had. Okay? If you want to say they're added, that's okay with me, because this document has a lot lower degree of merit. Okay? But here's your external proof. And by the way, the Jewish Talmudic documents acknowledge the life birth of Christ. They call him Yeshua ben Pandira. Pandira is supposed to be, he was raped, according to the Talmudic documents, by a Roman soldier. That is, Mary was raped by a Roman soldier, and that's how he was conceived. And so his name is Yeshua ben Pandira. His actual name is Yeshua ben Joseph, right? But the Talmudic documents refer to him in this name and discount intentionally his deity. But tell me something, guys. If I have an ancient document that attributes and acknowledges the fact that his life, birth, and death, basically, of Christ, what do you got? What is that? It's proof, right? Would you spend the time writing to discount something if it weren't? Right? Now the other problem is they're also acknowledging the fact that he was of an interesting, disputable birth. Right? So they made up a story, which is pretty cool, that his mother was raped by a Roman soldier. Do you see what this does? Do you see what this is? This provides indisputable proof of what? He existed. He was born. There was a dispute as to his legitimacy as a person, as a child, right? And also that he was important enough to write in the Talmudic documents. Paul is written about in the Talmudic documents. You know what they write about him? The man who will not be named. And he ain't Voldemort. Because Paul was a student of Gamaliel, who was the Rabboni of Rabbonis, the rabbi of rabbis, who basically, we know that Paul added to the Talmudic arguments. But guess what they had to do? They had to take his name out because the arguments were so good they still stand. He's still in the Talmud, guys. That proves what? The existence of Paul. It also proves there was a problem, right, with old Paul, the Pharisee. Doesn't it? I mean, I love this stuff. You know, it cracks me up that when you go to history class and people say, there's no proof. What kind of smoke are you smoking? You know, what are you smoking? What are you taking for drugs? You know, because it's obvious. This stuff's so easy. Archaeological evidence all support the works of the New Testament. There is nothing in archaeology that alters, refutes our knowledge of the life of Christ or any other person described in the New Testament. Remember, like, every time we dig up something, we find new proof. For years, they said, oh, Pontius Pilate never lived until they found what? An inscription in Caesar Maritimia that Pilate was the guy who made this arena, right? So we've actually got, I think, 2 Pilate inscriptions so far. So guess what? Whoa, Pilate's around. Well, Shazam. You know? Cracks me up. But remember what I told you about what historians are supposed to do? What are historians supposed to do when you have a document of high degree or merit? Well, they're supposed to accept it and give it the benefit of the doubt. In other words, you accept the fact that Pilate exists until what? You find something that contradicts it of a higher degree or merit. Right? Why are we following these rules? These basic rules of history. See? So, you know, we do this, if we do an external comparison of New Testament works, we see no disagreement. I have some, there's some at odds, but I don't have time to go into great detail with this. Genealogy of Christ around the Mount Plain, etc., etc. I just don't have time. We're running out of time. And there's something about Q, but I don't have time to go through that either. So anyway, New Testament documents are Greek historical documents. They are accidental religious documents. Do you know what I mean by that?
They're intended to be history, but they have religious over.
They're intended to be history. They're intended to write down stuff about history, but we have taken them in the modern era and turned them into religious documents, right? But they're really historical documents, and that's what the Catholic Church taught for years. They're unique in history. They're the most religious. Most religious documents claim inspiration. The New Testament documents do not claim inspiration. They claim observation. The authors never intend these documents to do anything other than record what they had observed in history. They're Greek rationalists, and I'll talk about that next week in a little more detail. So based on a legal historical test, we can conclude the written words of the books of the New Testament are historical fact. In most cases, primary source of historical fact. There is no reason to doubt Acts' historical accuracy or veracity. You don't have to have any belief to accept this. This isn't a belief thing. This is just a historical thing of fact. So, next time we'll talk about the logos to tell us of Acts. What is it? Who wrote it? The author's purpose? And how do we know? Thanks for your attention.